It started like any other school morning, kids laughing, backpacks bouncing, and parents gathered at the corner bus stop, just trying to get through another weekday. But what happened next had everyone holding their breath. A woman from the local HOA, who neighbors quietly call Karen, stormed over, claiming the children were causing too much noise, and standing on what she said was private property. Voices were raised, phones were pulled out, and what should have been a calm moment before school turned into something much more intense. Parents tried to de-escalate, reminding her it was a public sidewalk and the children were just waiting for the bus. But Karen wasn't backing down. She stood between the kids and the curb, arms crossed, telling them they'd have to wait somewhere else. The mood shifted fast. What started as annoying quickly felt dangerous. And the worst part? Most of the kids had no idea why this adult was suddenly blocking them from their morning routine. But here's where it takes an unexpected twist. While she thought she was dealing with a bunch of regular parents and school kids, someone important was watching. Someone who could actually do something about it. You won't believe who stepped in, and how everything changed the moment they revealed their identity. Stay tuned, because this is where things really heat up. Now, to really understand why this moment exploded the way it did, you have to know a bit more about the woman neighbors referred to as Karen. She's known in the community for sending out HOA violation notices over things like mismatched mailboxes or garden gnomes being too distracting. Most people just try to avoid her, but that morning, there was no avoiding the scene she caused. The kids had been gathering at that same bus stop for years. It's right on the corner of a public street, clearly marked, and safely distanced from the road. Parents take turns watching the kids, and it's always been smooth. Until now. Karen claimed she had documentation, but the sidewalk fell under HOA jurisdiction, even though the city map says otherwise. Still, she stood there, arguing with parents, blocking the view of oncoming traffic, and making the kids visibly nervous. Meanwhile, a man standing a few feet away was quietly observing everything. No one really noticed him at first. He was dressed casually, holding a coffee, and just blending in with the other parents. But his eyes never left the situation. He wasn't filming, wasn't interrupting, just watching. What Karen didn't realize was that she was making her biggest scene in front of someone who had the power to bring real consequences. And his silence, that was intentional. As the standoff dragged on, more parents started arriving, drawn by the raised voices and tense atmosphere. Some tried to reason with Karen, calmly explaining that the sidewalk was city-owned, but the kids had every right to be there. But she wasn't hearing it. She kept pointing to a printed map she'd brought with her, blurry, marked up with highlighter, and claiming it proved her case. One dad offered to call the city right then and there, but she shot him down, saying, "I've already spoken to the HOA board." Except, no one on the board had heard a word about this incident. Meanwhile, the children, who should have just been talking about their day or laughing about last night's homework, were huddled close together, unsure of what they did wrong. A few of the younger ones were visibly shaken. One little girl clutched her backpack like a shield. It was heartbreaking. That's when the quiet man with the coffee started moving closer, still not saying a word, just watching how Karen continued to escalate. What no one knew yet was that he wasn't just any parent. He was the new school superintendent, and he wasn't there for drama. He was there for a surprise walkthrough of neighborhood bus stops, checking safety procedures, and what he saw happening. It was far from safe, and definitely not okay. As the school bus turned the corner, bright yellow and rumbling up the street, the situation reached a boiling point. Karen stepped even closer to the curb, raising her voice, warning the kids not to move until she got answers. One mom gently guided her child back a few steps, clearly trying to avoid a bigger scene, but Karen wasn't backing down. She turned on her, accusing her of setting a bad example and endangering neighborhood order. It was like something out of a movie, parents frozen, kids caught in the middle, and this one woman acting like she had authority no one had given her. Then, just as the bus came to a stop and its doors opened, the quiet man finally stepped forward. He calmly introduced himself, not with anger, not with ego, just facts. He said his name, his role as the district's new superintendent, and that he had been observing for a reason. Karen blinked, stunned for a second. It was like someone had flipped a switch. You could feel the air shift. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. But his tone said everything. He'd seen enough. Enough to make decisions. Enough to ask some serious questions about safety, about behavior, and about the kind of example being set, not just for the kids, but for the entire community. What happened next? No one was ready for. Just as the superintendent stepped forward, everyone expected Karen to finally back down. But instead, she doubled down. Her expression tightened, and with a sharp voice, she said, "Well, if you're the superintendent, you should know these kids are a liability standing here." The crowd went silent. The parents looked at each other in disbelief. One dad quietly took out his phone and started recording, not to stir things up, but just in case things went further than anyone expected. That's when the second twist hit. A city maintenance truck rolled up behind the bus. Out stepped a man in a reflective vest holding a clipboard. He approached the group, looked around, and asked, "Is there a problem with the bus stop? We got a call from the HOA about illegal gatherings." He didn't sound accusatory, just confused. The superintendent looked at him, then at Karen, and calmly asked, "You made a formal report about the children?" Karen didn't deny it. She said, "I did what I had to. This has gone on too long. Rules matter." But what she didn't realize was that the city employee wasn't just there to check things out. He was also part of a newly launched initiative between the city and the school district. An initiative meant to improve student safety and track false complaints. At that moment, the stakes weren't just about a bus stop anymore. This was about accountability. And the people who had been quietly watching, they were finally starting to speak up. The tension was thick. Parents stood in a tight semicircle, kids still clinging to their backpacks, and Karen holding her ground like she was guarding a fortress. But now, with both the superintendent and the city official present, the spotlight wasn't just on her attitude, it was on her actions. The superintendent calmly turned to the city rep and asked, "Do you see any violations here?" The man shook his head. "Nope. Public sidewalk, city maintained. Bus stop's been registered for years." Karen's face flushed, but she still tried to argue. "That's not what the HOA records say." The city official cut her off gently, but firmly. HOA rules don't override city zoning. And calling this in as an emergency report, that's going in our system. The superintendent stepped forward again, his voice calm but steady. "These are our students. They deserve to feel safe. And this kind of interference, it won't be ignored." As the bus loaded the kids, parents exchanged quiet nods, finally feeling like someone had their backs. Karen stood off to the side, silent for the first time, realizing things had shifted, and not in her favor. But just as the bus pulled away and the crowd began to disperse, the city worker pulled the superintendent aside and said something that made him pause. "This isn't the first complaint from this HOA," he said. "It's the 5th, this month." That's when the superintendent pulled out his phone, opened his notes, and said, "Then maybe it's time we looked at that board too." Turns out, the story wasn't ending, it was just beginning. In the days that followed, the story spread quickly around the neighborhood. Parents felt relieved knowing the superintendent had witnessed everything firsthand. He followed up with both the city and the school board, pushing for clearer guidelines to protect students at public bus stops and to make sure no one could misuse HOA power again. The city also started reviewing complaint logs tied to the same HOA, digging into patterns that raised red flags. Karen, once the loudest voice in the neighborhood, suddenly became quiet. No more early morning confrontations, no more flyers about rule violations taped to doors. It seemed the spotlight had shifted, and this time she was on the receiving end of the scrutiny. The HOA board, after hearing from both the city and the district, held a meeting to review her role and the way complaints were being handled. The bus stop. It stayed right where it was. Parents continued walking their kids there, just like before, but now there was a sense of unity that hadn't been there in a while. If anything, the chaos had reminded everyone of something simple but important. Community means standing up for one another, especially when the kids are watching. And that morning, it became a moment no one would forget.